Hi, and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I'll help you ensure that your organization turns from the biggest expense to the biggest advantage. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, Tech Executive Coach and Consultant, and our subject today is your boundaries. If you've been following me, you know what a CT-No is. The person who almost always has the default stance of saying, nope, can't do, can't be, won't happen, need more time, whatever. Shooting down everything. And you know that I'm really against that. Nevertheless, you can very easily end up positioning yourself as the exactly wrong place you want to be just because you are so avoidant of saying no. That's when I see tech leaders who say yes and agree to things that go against their core. And when that happens, when you don't know how to set the proper boundaries, you miss yourself. That's what we're going to be talking about today. It might be that you agreed to have your team work during the weekend or pull an all-nighter for something that you knew wasn't really necessary, or that you agreed to commit to something that you knew does not make sense. The issues themselves might feel minor, but the problem is that this is genuinely one of those slippery slopes sorts of situations. When you start with that, those are a lot of S's, that past sentence. When you start with that, the problem is that very quickly you start tuning out to what you genuinely believe in. And very rapidly, I see teams deteriorating because people who relied on you as their leader lose trust. You stop believing in yourself and in your judgment, because when you don't, acknowledge what you're actually thinking, when you're agreeing to things that you think are just wrong, we create this dissonance between ourselves, which is greatly unhealthy. And you just usually end up creating a team that's not going to be very successful because they cannot be motivated when there is this sort of culture, when we're doing things that we all know are not the right sorts of things to do. Yes, you need to have your default stance be, how can we make this possible? When you're asked to do something, when you see an opportunity, don't immediately think, how can I just deflect it? But think, how can we make it happen? That suspension of disbelief that I keep talking about. And yet, do not turn into an unconditional yes. That's not sustainable. And I have for you in this short episode a few things that you can do in order to check between you and yourself whether the decisions you're making are the right ones, whether you are letting your boundaries slide or not. Number one, when you're looking at one of these decisions, don't just consider, okay, I'm going to ask that IC, that engineer, to pull an all-nighter or to not go to that wedding or, code through a flight or whatever it is. Think, how would you react if you were asked to do that? Were you, assuming that you were also an IC? Or how would you react if you heard that someone is asking that same thing from, your spouse or your child? Would you then still think, yeah, that makes sense? Or would you get angry and say, hey, that does not make sense? Or no, they are not to do that. If that's your core feeling, and yet you somehow become desensitized to doing it to the people on your team because, they're used to it, whatever, that means that you're letting a boundary slide here. The second example is, how would you feel if whatever you're asking people to do was, plastered all over the headlines of a newspaper tomorrow? You remember what newspapers are? I'm hoping. I still read them. But the equivalent of having it, in whatever local tech news, LinkedIn, blog, whatever that you actually care about, having that plastered there. Like, oh my God, company X, Acme, has been getting its employees to work every weekend for the past month, even though it's not really important, even though we see that the CEO said those things are not really material or that deadline can be pushed. If that sort of transparency were to become known to everyone, how would you feel about it? And I think these are two very, very useful sorts of self-tests that you can do very quickly to assess whether your reluctance to do something, that, you know how you get that feeling that something feels like it's wrong. That can really help you understand whether this is something that you do not want to do ethically because you feel like that's not the right thing to do as a leader in charge of this team, Or maybe it's just, the lizard brain trying to go into fight or flight and being like, no, 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 we cannot do it. It's going to be hard. Those are two different scenarios. It's fine to see a challenge and understand that challenge could be hard, but that's something that you can decide to take upon yourself, take upon your team. But you do not want to cross that boundary of doing things that you think are the wrong things to do in general. That's extremely unhealthy, and that's what we want to ensure you're not doing. Now, let's say you ran through these tests and you now recognize that you have a few things where you routinely make that same decision that is a wrong one. What do you do? Now, that's not something that we can cover in a few minutes of a podcast episode, because oftentimes this is about your communication with the CEO, about how you value your team, how you explain trade-offs, etc. I'm not going to cover all that in 3 minutes, but I have a few things for you to consider. One, if this is a recurring theme, it means that you are not communicating well enough with the CEO, with your product counterpart. And if that's the case, you ought to work on your communication right now. I've got plenty of episodes about that. And if you want to, this is one of the things that I routinely work on with people in our one-on-one work, because in advisory, we always see that communication is one of the key skills in making that CTO-CEO relationship, making that pair work well is one of the biggest priorities that I see. So if you need help with that, my email's in the show notes. Number 2, I want you to try to define where you can start pushing back easily, because it feels like the right thing, even if so far you've just you've bent your head, you've said okay. I want you to think, where are the cases that yes, that deadline is just BS, we can push that deadline? Or can you frame something in front of the CEO, in front of the rest of the executive team, and say something like, hey, people here have been working all-nighters every other week for the past 2 months. I think that's enough, or people are going to leave. You have to find where you can make your stand. And you know why? If you don't make a stand, if no one actually ever expects you to do anything, we don't need you. You might as well be replaced with an LLM. We want people who have a spine as a leader, and that's what you ought to do. And sometimes when I talk to people, and this is number 3 here of the things you can do, I see that they have the reluctance to speak up because they have some internal fear. What if the CEO says, no? What if, I end up being let go? And frankly, if you're going to be let go because of your boundaries, that's a heck of a reason to be let go. And when I work with people, I try not to tell people, I think you should, resign, because I try to think how can we make the entire company better, not just how to make that specific person run away from a situation, unless it's really a doomed situation. But at the end of the day, if you're trying to do the good thing, you're fighting a good fight, you're trying to ensure that you're withholding the right structure, you're giving your people a healthy boundary so they can be treated like you think they ought to be treated. If that's the case, if you don't want to be lying, etc., because the CEO wants to hide that someone's going to be let go, or if you don't want to be hiring people that might be getting cut within a month because whatever, if you know that you're going to be doing things that you don't feel good about those, it's not just that you should. I genuinely believe that you must say, this is my line. Tell the CEO, I'm not going to be doing that. When you stick to your boundaries, when you say this is the line, what you end up getting is usually a better situation for your team. And if you're going to get cut because of that, if you're going to get let go because of that, frankly, my friend, you have so many better opportunities. A good tech executive is always in need. If you actually find yourself needing help with that, email me. I'm almost always aware of something interesting happening. I'd be happy to try to help. But really, that's all in all a positive reason to end with a place, because your ethics are at a mismatch, because whatever culture you care about, whatever you want to instill in your team is not in alignment with the culture that the CEO wants to create. I can live with that. That's a good reason to change companies. And that's the sort of spine that you need to have as a leader if you want to create an amazing team, if you want to ensure that people will be, trusting you, coming after you when you told them that we need to do this, we need to do that. When we do have a reason to stay up all night, it's because we genuinely have a reason to stay up all night. As I said in the beginning, you want to ensure that you create a team that becomes your company's biggest advantage, that grows faster than the company needs you to. And that will only happen if your team trusts you, believes in you, you are not living with that dissonance within your mind, and you can just plow forward, focus on what's important. That's it. I hope that I've made you realize where you've been a bit of a coward recently and how to stick to it and ensure that you do not let go of your personal boundaries, of what you think is important and ethical. If you have any questions or comments, my email's in the show notes. I'm always happy to hear. If you haven't yet, do check out my newsletter, where every week you're going to get this podcast, an article, and a video, and some extra goodies. The link is also in the show notes, and I'll see you here next week. Ciao.